Music. Richard Kensington was never someone easily swayed by emotions. A self-made billionaire, he painstakingly built his empire from the ground up. Every single penny he amassed was the result of his unwavering determination, razor-sharp insight, and an ambition that knew no bounds. His name was synonymous with respect in boardrooms around the globe. His business moves were legendary, precise, and calculated to perfection. Many admired him. Some even feared him. But none of that truly held weight for Richard. What truly mattered to him, above all else, was his son, Dorian. From the very moment Dorian came into this world, he became Richard's pride, his joy, and his reason for everything. Richard funneled all his aspirations into his son, ensuring that he had access to the best of everything: education, mentors, and every opportunity money could buy. The vast empire Richard constructed wasn't just for himself, it was for Dorian. He envisioned his son continuing the legacy, building upon the foundation he had laid. Dorian was the center of his universe. But as time went by, that cherished bond began to fray. Richard watched in despair as his once loving son seemed to drift further and further away. The affection and care Richard lavished upon him were met with cold indifference. The humble, kind-hearted young boy he once adored had become someone unrecognizable, arrogant, entitled, and apathetic to virtues like loyalty, hard work, and integrity. Dorian treated his father's wealth and status as if they were inevitable, not earned. Richard couldn't ignore the truth anymore. His son had changed, and it pained him deeply. One quiet evening, as Richard sat in his study staring at the moonlit skyline, a harrowing thought pierced his mind. Had he failed as a father? Had his hard-earned fortune, instead of being a gift, become a curse that corrupted his son? The idea haunted him, growing heavier with every passing moment. Determined to uncover the truth, Richard resolved to take action, not with more lectures or conversations, but with a bold test. Richard decided to vanish. He would leave everything behind: his sprawling mansion, his wealth, even his name. He would blend into the shadows, becoming just another ordinary man in the crowd. If Dorian cared, truly cared, he would search for his father. It was a drastic plan, but in Richard's eyes, it was the only way forward. The following morning, Richard packed a modest duffel bag with only the bare essentials and a small amount of cash. Standing at the threshold of his mansion, he took one last, lingering look at the life he had built. For the first time in what felt like ages, he felt a sense of clarity. This was something he had to do, not for his empire, but for his son and himself. For weeks, Richard wandered the city streets, far removed from the luxurious life he once knew. The immaculate suits he used to wear were replaced by clothes that became tattered and worn. His polished leather shoes were now scuffed beyond recognition. He sought shelter wherever he could, ate sparingly, and lived anonymously, blending into the hustle and bustle of the everyday world. Gone was Richard Kensington, the billionaire icon. Now, he was just another nameless face in the crowd. From a distance, Richard observed Dorian's life. His son still lived in the lap of luxury, driving flashy cars and frequenting exclusive establishments. Richard occasionally caught fleeting glimpses of him through restaurant windows or heard whispers of his lavish exploits. It was clear that Dorian hadn't even noticed his father's absence, or if he had, he didn't seem to care. The question haunted Richard: did Dorian miss him, the man, or only the wealth he had left behind? One fateful day, Richard stood across the street from a high-end restaurant, the type where Dorian often dined with business associates and friends. Hidden in the shadows, Richard watched as his son arrived, laughing and chatting with a group of sharply dressed executives. The sight gripped Richard's heart with pain, but he remained out of sight, silently observing. Finally, mustering his courage, Richard decided to enter the restaurant. As he stepped inside, the elegant decor, crisp linens, and low murmur of conversations instantly reminded him of the life he had left behind. Approaching the hostess stand, he politely asked for a seat. Her disdainful eyes swept over his unkempt appearance. "I'm sorry, sir," she said with a sharp tone, "but we don't have any seats available for someone like you." The sting of her words hit Richard hard. He had grown used to such treatment in his new life, but it didn't make it hurt any less. Swallowing his pride, he pleaded, "Please. I've had a long day. I just need a moment." Her expression didn't soften. Turning away, Richard caught sight of Dorian seated at a table, laughing with his colleagues, completely at ease. The pang of sadness in his chest deepened. Taking a deep breath, Richard stepped closer and called out, "Dorian." Dorian turned, his expression shifting from mild confusion to something colder. His tone was sharp as he asked, "Do I know you?" Richard's heart sank. Summoning every ounce of courage, he said, "It's me, your father." Richard's weathered face reflected years of toil and love, but his expression remained steadfast. Without hesitation, Dorian replied coldly, "I don't have time for this. Leave." The harsh dismissal hit Richard like a thunderclap, breaking his heart into pieces. He stood there for a moment, stunned and defeated, before quietly turning away. As he exited the restaurant, the weight of his son's indifference pressed down on him, crushing his spirit. The days that followed passed in a fog of sadness and contemplation. Richard couldn't ignore the harsh reality. His son hadn't just failed the test, he had failed him as a person. Determined to take action, Richard reached out to his longtime lawyer, Marcus. "I want to make some changes to my will," Richard stated firmly. "Drastically reduce Dorian's inheritance. Leave him enough to survive but not enough to thrive." Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Richard, I've worked with you for years, and I've always trusted your decisions. But this is unprecedented." "I trust you'll do what I ask, Marcus," Richard replied, his tone resolute. To gain a clearer picture of Dorian's life, Richard also hired a private investigator named Olivia. Her findings were like daggers to his heart. Dorian had been engaging in underhanded deals, exploiting clients, and betraying colleagues who had once been loyal to him. The son Richard had once adored was not only selfish but unethical. The revelations left Richard heartbroken, but they also solidified his resolve. He knew he had to confront his son one final time. Summoning Dorian to the mansion, Richard waited in the grand dining room, his hands resting on the polished table that had once hosted countless family meals. When Dorian arrived, the confidence he usually wore like armor was gone, replaced by unease. Richard motioned for him to sit. "You failed me," Richard began, his voice steady but tinged with deep sorrow. "I gave you everything, more than most could ever dream of, and you've thrown it all away." Dorian bristled, his voice rising defensively. "I've worked hard for my success. I earned it." "No," Richard countered sharply, his voice firm. "You were handed every advantage, and instead of building on them with integrity, you betrayed not just me, but every value I tried to instill in you." Sliding a folder across the table, Richard's hand trembled slightly. Inside were the legal documents that would sever Dorian's access to the family fortune. As Dorian opened the folder, his face drained of color. "You can't do this," he shouted, his voice filled with disbelief and anger. "I already have," Richard said, his voice breaking under the weight of his emotions. "This is the last lesson I can give you, Dorian. From here on, you must build your own life, your own legacy." Furious and hurt, Dorian stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. "You'll regret this," he yelled before storming out of the mansion, slamming the grand doors behind him. Months passed, and Dorian's once glamorous life unraveled. His business ventures collapsed one after the other. Friends who had been eager to bask in his wealth and influence abandoned him when the money ran dry. For the first time in his life, Dorian faced the harsh consequences of his actions, alone. One stormy night, with rain pouring in torrents, Dorian found himself standing outside the gates of the mansion he once called home. His clothes were drenched, and his heart felt heavier than the dark clouds above. He gazed through the iron bars, memories of his father's love and guidance flooding his mind. The wealth, the luxury, it all seemed meaningless now. What Dorian truly missed was his father's unwavering love and the moral compass he had tried so hard to instill. For the first time, he realized the true meaning of wealth wasn't in material possessions but in family, integrity, and love. As the rain continued to pour, Dorian turned and began to walk away, his footsteps heavy with regret. Yet, in his heart, a small ember of hope flickered. He resolved to change, to become the man his father had always hoped he would be. The path ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but he knew it was a road he had to walk alone. If this story moved you with its twists and heartfelt lessons, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more powerful narratives that inspire and challenge the way we see life. Stay tuned for more tales of transformation, redemption, and hard-earned wisdom.